Winner of a local essay contest, A Murder, A Ship at Sea, and a Scientific Experiment by Stephen A. Jeffrey. I know my subject well, and you have to write a book. You can't just rave on, and you can, but I'm not going to. Einstein has never been to Philadelphia. The question is, first and foremost, what is the hypothesis to explain the Philadelphia experiment? And it is that the experiment was disinformation to confuse the Germans about the Manhattan Project and its true purpose. And its true purpose was an experiment designed to test Einstein's theory of relativity. Except that Einstein has never even been to Philadelphia, and the Eldridge was stationed in New York, and it was never in Philadelphia. The Germans never mentioned Philadelphia in their intelligence, except they wanted to destroy a cryolite factory, and it is an alloy of aluminium, and it is also sodium. If it was CIA disinformation to confuse Germany about the A-bomb, then it would be found in secret German A-bomb files, which are not declassified. And they would be declassified if they were disinformation meant for foreign powers like the Russians, and the Russians do not have a secret project called Philadelphia. 2. And if they did have such a project, the disinformation would have been a success, and maybe Russia realized it was a lie. And they might have realized the truth about the atomic bomb, which they did in fact discover. So maybe they understood the role Einstein's unified theory had to play in the atomic bomb. Or maybe the Philadelphia experiment was a lie that came much later, and maybe it had nothing to do with the CIA, it was just that it began as a lie, and like Pinocchio's nose, just grew longer and longer. But maybe the CIA used it as an example of their disinformation campaign. Certainly Stan Dio mixed it up with alien spaceships and physics from another world, and he was supposed to be CIA. But when a person is a liar, you cannot believe anything they say, even if they say they are CIA. Conclusion: there was something called the Philadelphia experiment, which may not have been in Philadelphia, that was covered up. But due to the disinformation and downright lies, we may never know just what that something was. The book even gives the answer to why they would tell such a terrible lie, but the answer is not good enough. It is not easy to start with a lie and find the truth. You have to start with the truth to find lies. The Philadelphia experiment is based on a primary source document, the Vero edition of the Case for the UFO. The book was supposed to be given to the ONR by Allende when Jessup distanced himself from the delusional man. But the fact that they contacted Morris Jessup meant that they saw the book as an opportunity for disinformation that would cover the truth of some of the Navy's own experiments, whatever they might have involved, perhaps Einstein and nuclear torpedoes. Whatever it was, this was where the CIA took over this whole business. Jessup, on his deathbed, was going to expose the Philadelphia experiment, maybe the ONR role in the creation of the Varro version. Someone was mentioned that the Case for the UFO was a better read without the crazy annotations. Jessup seems to be the only one the ONR wanted to discredit. Maybe the government of the day believes UFOs were real and wanted to suppress Jessup's book, which may explain why his publisher did not want another book, which led to his depression and eventual suicide. Maybe he did not jump, but he was pushed. And that means it's a case of who done it. Someone killed Jessup, probably the ONR, so that they could tell lies about Philadelphia experiment without him exposing it all as a hoax. That is, if Wikipedia is right, before his death he was about to tell the truth about Philadelphia, which is why he did not believe it. He did not believe Karas Allende because he was trained in science and had a Master of Science, but was not a doctorate. So they incorrectly called him a doctor, which was not a crime in those days. But maybe the doctor understood the disease by the symptoms and understood that the cover-up went deep into the US intelligence. Maybe it involved the Manhattan Project and Einstein's theories. Maybe Allende was a plant of the CIA, which is just brilliant because it explains Al-Balek later on also being a plant and a straw man. Anyone who believes in some kind of experiment that is top secret is now crazy. But the CIA is not trying to cover up time travel experiments, even though they are crazy enough to attempt time travel. It is more likely that the real experiments involve a classical theory of everything, which quantum mechanics claims is impossible but Einstein believed was possible. I will present my own classical theory of everything as an example of what they may be trying to cover up. Dirichlet's equation can be used to explain the orbit of electrons in any universe, including a big crunch. Electrons in 10 large spatial dimensions and a contracting universe spiral into the nucleus, and they form supermassive electrons when gravity overcomes repulsion between electrons. This can all be described with classical mechanics and maybe Maxwell's equations. You don't need Heisenberg's and the explanation that the experiment was an accident was that it was not intended to produce that result, and that it could not be reproduced, so it's not at all science. If you cannot repeat an experiment again and again, it's not science. But could this be science fiction? Like cold fusion, something that was strange but could not be repeated. That does not mean that cold fusion is not science. Some people say that it does work and that they have repeated the experiment. It is the same with Philadelphia. There is evidence that the experiment was repeated with an aircraft in 1958 that was also called Project Rainbow. Now, the evidence is circumstantial as it was under the control of the CIA, and we can't be sure Wikipedia has it right. The whole thing is a mistake based on one man's idea of how to make himself famous, and that could be what I am doing as well. I want to solve the experiment so that they can make a movie. But Hollande has heard rumours of an experiment, and he liked science fiction and UFOs because he read Jessop's book. And only a fringe of people have read Jessop's book. It was not a popular novelette. So he made the whole thing up, and that is what he confessed to before he died. He is supposed to have told a magazine that the whole thing was a hoax and that he acted alone. But the ONR involvement seemed to have been real, so maybe he did not act alone. Maybe he was part of the ONR and their man for the hour, and if he was their patsy, he kept the secret until he was old enough not to care. Or they told him that the circumstances had changed and they wanted to distance themselves from the story that he had become Philadelphia. Maybe saner minds at the ONR prevailed, and they saw the dangers of all these people believing in disinformation. They say the disinformation is to cover up time travel experiments and that they're real. Maybe some secret experiments and theories, maybe not involving time travel as disinformation says. I really don't think that they've built a time machine under a mountain with a $1 trillion budget that bypasses Congress. This kind of conspiracy just can't exist. But how was the Manhattan Project funded? And is there a new Manhattan Project for energy? And is it funded secretly? The question of whether the CIA made AIDS in a lab or if it's just a space-borne illness is just as ludicrous. Of course, no one would be bad enough to make AIDS to wipe out the blacks and homosexuals, except maybe the Nazi Party, and they're dead. Let's hope so, and let's believe so. The Nazis would have kept technology a secret, especially the atomic bomb, and the Russians were able to keep the Cuban crisis a secret from their own people. However, this was before the internet. Is it possible to keep a secret these days with the net everywhere? Maybe if you could tell lies about the subject, and maybe that's what the Philadelphia experiment really is, the anatomy of a lie. And it answers the question, why do people tell lies about something this important? Do people have a need to believe in something bigger than themselves when they don't believe in God? So they choose UFOs and the Philadelphia experiment. Were there technologies available in the US in the 1950s that were advanced enough to create a complete displacement, such as in the Philadelphia experiment? Radio and magnetic fields have been in existence for nearly 200 years. Philadelphia experiment was a cloaking experiment to create radar invisibility. This was designed as a secret by Tesla. I dispute that Tesla was involved at all, and is reputed to have utilized a spherical or toroidal field of HF radio waves superimposed on a magnetic component. There are no theoretical limitations to the possibility of warping space-time or the other to the extent that the EM waves are deflected around the area, With regards to displacement, side effects occur due to the phase shifting of the electrons spin slightly outside of the dimension, i.e. that matter no longer reflected light to observers. A similar invisibility effect can be observed when a hydrogen bomb is detonated. It becomes actually invisible just because of the collapse of the core. This is caused by the stripping of electrons and subsequent collapse of the device initiated by the core. Was the government of the time capable of covering up the information and lying to the public? The stealth bomber was classified for nearly 30 years and no one knew about it outside of Black Ops. This proves the secretive capabilities. Since we are talking about a few decades before the stealth bomber, we would expect a small decrease in security. 3. Are there survivors of the Philadelphia experiment? Well, it's debatable. 4. Were Einstein's theories the whole basis for the Philadelphia experiment? No. While describable in a relative framework, the device could be constructed using 19th century knowledge of radio and magnetics with a large amount of funding. Tesla's involvement seemed to have been spurious and based on disinformation of Al-Balak, where Einstein and not Tesla was working for the Navy at the time. Did the US government experiment with combining psychic abilities and machines as a follow-up to the Philadelphia experiment? This is claimed by Al-Balak and others and is scientifically feasible since the brain emits radiation relative to thoughts and matter it composed on energy, that it would be possible to condense matter directly using the human mind and a powerful scientific device. In fact, this is the only feasible approach, since we already know that the consciousness of perception is strangely central to reality. Computers capable of the equivalent of human thought, power will not exist until 2015 or so. My friend Justin wrote this, and I agree with the skeptics that the answer to all these questions is not likely. 6. Are the experiments still ongoing? Our current technology has reached such a level that it actually makes Star Trek look laughable. I have personally experienced the technological level possessed by government agencies to be far beyond what is even thought possible from the many public arena scientists. However, I dispute this, as do lecturers that keep these secrets from physics students when they are trying to prepare them for a life of scientific inquiry. No, it would not be science then. And when do the students get initiated into these secret theories? 7. Did and do satellite technology play a role in the physical displacement of matter? The invention of the transistor, public UFO sightings, fibre optics and other important points in human social growth occurred during the 1940s and 50s. According to accounts, the PE equipment utilised valves for the power stages. Even to this day, valves are used for a number of high-power, long-life applications and can still handle high power levels at frequencies unachievable by transistors. These 3 questions have no relation to the discussion and therefore cannot be answered. To give my personal opinion, aliens have been steering our development from the start. It gets back to the good and bad aliens, the myth that some guide humanity and want to destroy us, and they fight between them. We are pawns in their cosmic game, but this too seems unlikely. Are governments taking part in similar experiments? Was there a Nazi German Philadelphia experiment or later a Russian one? It seems that there are no German records to check destroyed in the bombings, is the theory. Are other governments taking part in similar experiments? Well, I think this one is relevant if the disinformation was aimed at the Nazis, and there should have been an experiment in Germany. 9. Were ancient technologies taken into account? What ancient technologies, except Greek philosophy? There was no experimental technology in ancient times, and scientific method of experimentation was not used until modern times. 10. Are extraplanetary aliens shaping similar experiments? Aliens from where you would think we know what solar system they come from, if that were that easy. It's generally accepted that the Philadelphia experiment, as it is frequently described, never happened. I can't speak to the history, but I can speak to the physics. There is no aspect of the experiment, the invisibility, teleportation, that is remotely possible in any sense. What little I have read is science fiction. It would be pretty cool, but to see the beat of my knowledge, it is impossible. So Justin I says exactly the opposite, that all of the physics we have today to make the experiment happen. So I think I believe the mathematician, not only the history for the experiment is impossible, but also the physics. Al-Balik realised his place in the Philadelphia experiment while watching the movie by the same name. This is so funny peculiar that it is ridiculous. So is Al just a presumptuous prophet? What God has made twisted men cannot straighten out. And that is what it is like with this experiment. Tesla's involvement comes from Al, so you have to separate the fact from the fiction. It was Einstein and his theory that was supposed to be tested in 1943. And the Navy, whom Einstein is working for, maybe there were experiments that were done to test Einstein's field theory as part of the Manhattan Project. At the time, nobody knew his theory was incomplete. Without Heisenberg's uncertainty principles, everybody in 1943 believed Einstein, especially the Army and the Navy. Maybe they wanted a ship to deliver a nuclear weapon that would be invisible, to test Einstein's field theory as part of the Manhattan Project. At the time, nobody knew his theory was incomplete. Without Heisenberg's uncertainty principles, everybody in 1943 believed Einstein, especially the Army and the Navy. Maybe they wanted a ship to deliver a nuclear weapon that would be invisible. Maybe the idea was to deliver nuclear torpedoes with an invisible ship or sub. The whole thing never happened, and the evidence is there that something did happen. But not what we think happened. Some things are better left unsaid, and that is that everything that they say about the Philadelphia experiment is a lie, because everything has to be a little bit true. That is the anatomy of a lie. And it is true Einstein worked for the Navy, and it is true he was completing his unified field theory, and that it has to do with electromagnetism and gravity, which are the two mainstays of the experiment. What is true is that the experiment took place in a shipyard before the Eldridge was commissioned, and it's even possible for there to be a skeleton crew that was put together just for this purpose. It seems they would have chosen sailors as you would choose astronauts. They would have been expecting something to happen, and they were not expecting something to happen. And it may be the case that they were surprised by Einstein knew what the result would be. We have moved on from believing any old lie, but not as far as we need to, because telling lies is what they do, and you have to be on your guard. The crew were never heard from again, so they were not the present crew of the Eldridge who are in the media. But they were all declared missing in action. And what you would only need to check the files for missing in action to see if any names appeared were familiar. But the thing is, we don't know who they were, and maybe we will never know. It is classified that they died in mental hospitals, and only one has ever lived to tell his story, and he was on board another ship. So we are supposed to believe that they were 100% effective in covering up the experiment and preventing the sailors from talking about their experience. Maybe enough money was spent to keep it a secret. Maybe you would have to spend $1 billion to keep a secret like that. Maybe with all the media interest, you would think that they would have gotten one interview with one sailor who took part in the experiment. But there is not one interview, not one primary source document, except the log of the Eldridge, which may or may not be missing pages depending on who you talk to. Light can have a wavelength as big as the universe, which could explain dark energy and magnetic fields around black holes and in empty space. Light can have wavelengths we cannot detect according to Maxwell's theory. Maybe this could explain the Philadelphia experiment. Maybe we could have known about these other frequencies. Maybe we could have known about these other frequencies of light since 1943. The greatest disappearing act ever was the sailors that took part in the experiment. They were declared missing in action, and that's what their relatives were told. And it doesn't sound true, and it's not true. Why did the families of the sailors not ask questions about their relatives, particularly when the experiment became public? Where are the families, and why are they not suing this government for compensation? If it doesn't sound true, then it's not true, says Judge Judy, and I think she would rule that the Philadelphia experiment never happened. If you don't believe this, you can ask her. It was all bogus, it was all disinformation to do with war and never really happened. But that is not a way to end a prize-winning essay. This is how to end it. That's all I have to say about that. I'm going to call a lawyer and organise a class action to sue the US government on behalf of survivors of the Philadelphia experiment. Please come forward and get your settlement. So there is no way to be honest and admit I can't write this book because there is nothing to say. All of the technology is a delusion, and not quite. I think of how a magnet can transfer magnetism to a steel object. And if magnetism can be transferred, then a ship can be transferred in time-space. It can absorb radiation and become a magnetic field. And of course, this is just nonsense. But aliens soon learn E=mc², and they blow themselves up. And maybe this secret is so serious that it has to be kept by any means because it could destroy all life on Earth. And that it's an interesting hypothesis, but just who has the secret of destroying all life on Earth, and just who is keeping these secrets? E=mc² leads to the atomic bomb, at least we believe it does, but the equation is not complete without momentum, so mass has to be in motion at the speed of light. That sounds very similar to the Philadelphia experiment, the mass being the ship which travelled to Norfolk at the speed of light, or instantaneously. And if you travelled faster than light, that would be the secret that would have to be kept. But it's very unlikely that we could keep a secret of faster than light travel, or ships that travel at the speed of light. But there are thousands of UFOs that are not explained according to Project Blue Book. If these are not alien spaceships, then there is a secret space program that explores the cosmos. And that makes sense to UFO buffs. That is why There Is a Hustle was retired, because they knew they would not need it. Then they waste billions on old technology when they already have Star Trek style technology. That is highly unlikely, and that is what we find when we test to see if it makes sense. It does not make sense, and it is not true. So UFOs either are alien spacecraft or spacecraft from our future, or they do not exist. Could the Philadelphia experiment have made contact with ET? And that is a possibility as long as you don't think of an alien. And that is a possibility as long as you don't think of an alien coming out of a vortex and eating people. This seems so ridiculous and so unlikely that people immediately distance themselves from it. But what if the Philadelphia experiments discovered other dimensions, even universes? Again, who would keep the secret, and how would it be done? In space, infinite, and we can travel an infinite distance. If we can, it is one hell of a secret that it has to be kept for 60 years. But what if they don't know what went right and they can't repeat the experiment? Then it's like cold fusion. The results are reported, but it's an accident that cannot be repeated, and that, of course, is not science. And there are always observations that do not fit into the theory, and they are disregarded, and maybe the Philadelphia experiment is disregarded because it does not fit the theory. And that makes sense and could be true. That they observed something usual and could never be repeated, except with advanced alien technology, which does not exist because we are not in touch with aliens in other universes or dimensions. A wormhole would have a feedback loop that would presumably destroy the wormhole, a relief for historians as Hawking is quoted, but a disappointment to dinosaur hunters, and a space-time tunnel between Philadelphia and Norfolk, all such as described in Montauk, New York, a seaside resort, with the oldest cattle ranch in America. Maybe a great white shark would be more possible in Montauk, New York than a time-space wormhole, but I have a recipe for a wormhole, a thought experiment based on Newton's clock. Newton's clock converts a circular Earth orbit of 360 days/degrees in 10 large spatial dimensions to an elliptical Earth orbit of 365 days in 3D plus 1 of time. An elliptical orbit has to be in 3 large spatial dimensions, but you can reverse the equation to describe Newton's and Einstein's equations together for an elliptical Earth orbit with a difference of 6 minutes approximately sidereal time, which is the correction when converting from a perfect circle. Reverse the equation and you get Einstein's equation expressed in terms of 10 large spatial dimensions of string theory, but of course string theory is 10 spatial dimensions curled up. So we imagine 10 large spatial dimensions in a contracting universe. Reverse the equation and you get Einstein's equation expressed in terms of 10 large spatial dimensions of string theory, but of course string theory is 10 spatial dimensions curled up. So we imagine 10 large spatial dimensions in a contracting universe.